Hello learners, Quality Engineering and Management, Week 7, Video 25, topic is on benchmarking. Presented by Dr. N.Venkateshwarlu, Associate Professor, Mechanical Engineering, SOET, IGNOU, New Delhi. Objectives. Learners, after listening this lecture, you should be able to define benchmarking, appreciate importance of benchmarking, describe the purpose of benchmarking, describe the concept of benchmarking, explain types of benchmarking, describe the process of benchmarking, conceptualize the role of critical success factors in benchmarking, know the application of benchmarking. Learners, these are the various objectives we are going to discuss in this video. Understanding benchmarking. Benchmarking means making comparisons. Means a company A has to compare with B. Why it has to compare? Because B may be highly performing. So when A want to achieve the performance level with B. So then we have to compare their processes. So that is the one benchmarking process. Making comparisons, developing required standards, improve through learning, adoption of industry best practices, improving the process performance. This will be discussed further. So definition of benchmarking. Benchmarking is simply about making comparisons with other organizations and then learning the lessons that those comparisons thrown up. Benchmarking is the continuous process of measuring products, services, practices against the toughest competitors or industry leaders. So what the definition says that any company, so one has to be in the competitive market, they have to improve their processes, they have to improve their performance. So this benchmarking is the one of the method which can be utilized to improve their performance. So here one has to do nothing. They have to adapt the processes the highly performing industry is practicing the best practices of high performing industries, and which can be adapted in the other industry to achieve the performance levels. So that is the meaning of a benchmarking. The concept and purpose of benchmarking. Benchmarking is a practical management tool for improving the performance by learning from best practices and the processes by which they are achieved. The purpose of benchmarking is to help improve the effectiveness of process, product quality and delivery of services. So why the benchmarking is required? To improve the processes and product quality and delivery of services. Importance of benchmarking and need for improvement. Benchmarking is very important to the organizations in all respects such as product performance, process improvement, efficient design and effective delivery of services. Those organizations gives importance to benchmarking of their processes, products and services gains the competitive advantage. So here to gain the competitive advantage for any organization or any company, it needs to improve continuously either in the performance or the quality improvement or the technology implementation. So how it can take place, suppose once you compare with the competitors, then only you can come to know that your performance is at this level. So that you want to improve the present level to the competitors level, you need to benchmark your low performing processes. Then you have to analyze your low performing processes and then compare with the high performing industries processes and find the gap and what are the reasons for that gap. Then after analyzing, then you can adapt those processes what the highly performing industries practicing. That good practices can be adapted in your industry so that your performance can be improved. That is the importance of a benchmarking. The types of benchmarking. There are various types of benchmarking processes are there. One is strategic benchmarking, performance or competitive benchmarking, process benchmarking, functional benchmarking, internal benchmarking, external benchmarking, and international benchmarking. The strategic benchmarking is, in the strategic benchmarking, a company in a strategically or long-term plan, they want to improve overall performance of the industry. So overall, they want to improve their capabilities to a certain level than present level. So for that, strategically, a company has to implement various methods, various technology in a long way, long-term plan. Long-term plan has to be established. For that, they have to compare with the highest competitors' performances, highest competitors' capabilities, and then compare with your capabilities, and then adopt those practices in your company, so that it should be in a strategical. Then second comes to the performance or competitive benchmarking. So it is a short-term plan. You can say that in a 6 months we need to achieve some benchmark, so achieve the performance of your company better than with competitors. So for that you need to benchmark your processes in comparisons with the highest performing industry's performance. That is known as a competitive benchmarking. Then process benchmarking. The process benchmarking is, suppose a company is manufacturing cars, and it has so many processes, machining processes, press processes, polishing processes, or painting process. So there are various processes. You can see that in that you have to select a process. How you can select? If that process is performing low, so you want to improve that particular process, so you need to study that process, and you have to analyze those processes, and you have to find out the level of that performance level of that process, and then you have to study the highest performing industries process, similar process, and then you have to adapt those best practices in your processes so that your process can be improved. That is the process benchmarking. Then functional benchmarking. In the functional benchmarking, like it is the materials department, quality department, or planning department. So those departments, the functional department, those are called as a functional departments. In that functional department also, the benchmarking practices can be implemented to enhance the level of their performance. So the function has to be compared with the highest performing industries, or it can be, the functional benchmarking can be compared internally also. How the internally? Because you can compare your functions with your functions in some other place, in other same industry, your industry only, but in some other place the same function is performing there well, but it is not performing here well. So that you have to compare with those functions with here. Then you can adapt those functional processes, best practices in this company, this processes, so that this functional benchmarking can be adopted. So in that way one has to do this functional benchmarking. Then comes to internal benchmarking. So internal benchmarking is the benchmarking process. It is the internally in the same industry, it has to compare with the other processes. There are various processes, painting, bending, or blanking, pressing, or various operations are there. In the machining process, or you are comparing with machining process with you can say that pressing process. Then if the pressing process performance is very high, but in the machining process the performance is low, so you want to improve the machining shop performance, then you have to compare those processes, methods, the people, and the machinery method. So with that the press shop processes, then you can compare and you can adapt those best practices performed in the machine shop in the press shop in your industry and then practiced in the machine shop in your same industry, then you can improve. So that is known as internal benchmarking. So you are comparing with internal processes, internal departments separately, so that you can improve upon. So that is known as a internal benchmarking. Then external benchmarking. External benchmarking is a benchmarking process. You are comparing total, you want to improve a industry's performance, overall performance, or you can say that you want to improve a particular machining shop floor performance you want to improve. So you need to compare with your similar processes in the external other companies' similar processes, so that you can identify the gaps and you can implement those, or you can adapt those best practices in your shop, so that it can be improved. The performance can be improved, the capabilities can be improved, the quality can be improved. So like this is known as a external benchmarking. You are comparing with external companies, other companies, and best in class companies. So that is known as a external benchmarking. Then finally, the international benchmarking. So why it is required international benchmarking? Because you want to sell your products internationally. So for that you need to benchmark your practices with international companies. So international processes, international company performances. So that is if you want to improve a particular company in one place, and so it may be a car, or it may be a watch, or it may be a mobile you are manufacturing. So that has to be achieve the levels of international marketing standards. So then only your products will be sold internationally in other countries. So that is the need of international benchmarking. But how it practices this? Your company needs to benchmark with the international companies in other countries. So that processes you need to identify the gaps. You have to get you take the training, or you have to learn from those international companies some processes, some methods, or so that can be adapted in your company, so that you can improve upon your performance, your quality, so that you can sell your goods internationally. That is the purpose of international benchmarking. These are the various types of benchmarking practices. Then value of benchmarking. The benchmarking not only improves the performance but also brings the value addition. So by benchmarking practices, your value can be added, value addition can take place. The value addition can be in the form of helps identify and facilitate sharing of key performance factors for peer organizations, encourages collaborations. For example, here the value addition takes place when the relationship between the suppliers and the customers is in a good relationship, in a long-term relationship. Then you can discuss various things. We can reduce the quality problems. Quality of raw materials supplying from the suppliers can be reduced to minimal, or sometimes it can be a zero defect raw materials can reach to your company. So that is the value addition through maintaining best relationships or encouraging collaborations. Then features of benchmarking. The main features of benchmarking are as follows. It is a managerial tool. It is process of continuous learning, and this learning comes from others through a sharing of knowledge and experiences. It is to identify best practices and compare with current performances and adapting those best practices in the company which is performing low, so that it can improve. The process benchmarking. The basic structure of any benchmarking process consists of the following 5 steps: element, aspect, scale, score, or benchmark. Element means you have to identify some process or product or method, so you want to improve upon that. So first you have to identify, suppose you identified a machine process, then goes to aspect. What are those aspects? In the tool problem or machine problem or operator or whatever the training is required. So like that aspects one has to identify. Then scale, how to scale? It can be like giving percentage or giving numbers, like that the scale should be decided. Then scoring for each activity, so the score has to be given. Then benchmark your industry's standard with comparing with the highly performing industry standards. So by seeing this, the benchmarking the operations with leading company. Here you have seen that performance aspect, which are staff, supplier, logistics, IT systems, applications, data, facilities. So if the leading company's staff is 3.7, in your company it is also 3.7. So there is no need of change, but you want to reduce till the staff to 3.0. That is your standard, your target you want to achieve. You want to benchmark that. So like that, in the suppliers are in the leading company, suppliers are 4.0, but in your company it is 3.5. Still you want to reduce to 3 only. So that is your you want to achieve with that 3 suppliers, you want to achieve the same quality. So like that, if you see that IT systems, or in the IT systems it is 3.6 in leading company, and in your company the IT systems are only 2.7. So the gap is 0.9. So you want to improve up to 3.3. That is your benchmark. So in this way, in the data, if you see that the data management or data collection system or data managers, in that leading company it is 3.6, but in it is very minimal in your company, that is 2.0. So there is a big gap in data management or data collection. So here the gap is 1.6, and you have make the target as to 3.0. That is depending upon your capabilities. So like this, you have to benchmark your targets and then practice the methods what they are practicing, which should be implemented in your company to achieve these targeted benchmarked targets. Learners, applications of benchmarking: identifying and managing risks in the financial sector, 360-degree appraisals, benchmarking training for communication, benchmarking for supplier reduction in the manufacturing companies, benchmarking for uninterrupted quality power supply to industries and shopping malls, benchmarking for timely supply of goods for the online orders, benchmarking for rejection rate reduction in manufacturing companies. These are the various applications. You have seen that online orders like Amazon, Flipkart, there are competitive way they are working. The Flipkart supplies the goods in 5 days or 6 days, but in Amazon it supplies goods within 3 to 2 days, because of they have a network of the stores or network of what you can say that good network. Because of that they are improving upon. So like that, the various advantages are there with the benchmarking practices. Advantages of benchmarking: it is an effective wake-up call which helps to work as an agent for change. It is a practical approach in which changes in performance can be achieved by replicating the best practices already undertaken by other leading companies. It gives impetus for seeking new ways of doing things, which comes through learning only. It helps to improve quality, productivity, and assist to identify priorities for improvement. It allows a wide range of performance indicators to be studied and performance improved. Disadvantages: there are various disadvantages also there. Difficult in getting agreement on what indicators are to be used. Difficulties in defining the data. The project can be completed quickly, but the results may take much longer time. Highly ambitious goals may lead to unsuccessful benchmarking processes. Difficulties in identifying correct critical success factors for best practices. Cultural differences may lead to some difficulties in applying best practices as happening in leader companies. Mistakes to be avoided during benchmarking. Benchmark should not be just for the sake of doing. Not defining the data items correctly and consistently and not collecting the data accurately limits its effectiveness. Not spending enough time in the beginning to select right framework for performance indicators. Simply relying on pre-existing benchmarks instead of modifying, adopting, recording to organizational needs. Critical success factors. The critical success factors are basically those that play an important role in the success of organization. Critical success factors, popularly known, are the essential areas actively that must be performed well if one is to achieve the mission, objectives or goals for the one's organization or project. If one is able to identify the CSFs, one can easily create a common reference point, which will in turn help direct and measure the success of one's organization or process. CSFs have now become an important tool for the implementing strategies in an organization. Definition of critical success factors. According to John F. Rockhard, CSF is defined as the limited number of areas in which results, if they are satisfactory, will ensure successful competitive performance for the organization. They are the few key areas where things must go right for the business to flourish. If results in these areas are not adequate, the organization efforts for the period will be less than desired. The main focus of CSF is on the most important areas and to get into detail of what is to be achieved and how it is to be achieved. So here the concept of critical success factor, you can see here the relation between mission, goals and CSFs. So the mission is a power company wants to become number one. So what are these goals? The goals are gain market share, and they should be the 24-hour quality power supply should be there. Then sustain customer satisfaction to 98%. So for that, to achieve that, one has to identify correct critical success factors and they have to practice. They have to adapt from the best companies so that they can perform well and they can achieve these goals and they will become the number one company in that field, that industry. So that is the importance of critical success factors. Here the critical success factors they have identified and they have to practice those critical success factors for become number one company in that city. So the stepwise process of identifying critical success factors are: in the step 1, establish the mission and strategic goals possible, identify the CSF to achieve the set goals, evaluating the list of possible CSFs to absolutes, monitoring and measuring each CSF, continuous monitoring and re-evaluation of CSFs to ensure that right track is being followed to achieve the best goals. Role of CSFs in performance benchmarking. When we identify the gaps in the benchmarking process while comparing the results, the role of CSFs comes into play. These gaps can be covered up by identifying the CSFs and working on them to achieve the competitive edge. It can also be said that identifying CSFs and communicating them with everyone will help in keeping the project or process on track and in turn will help in achieving the common goals of the organization. In benchmarking exercise also there are certain CSFs and it is important to ensure that benchmarking is management tool So senior management should not only support it but also committed to continuous improvement. Benchmarking exercise should be done by teams, preferably cross-functional teams. The team should have clear picture of their organization's performance, and subsequently the team should approach others for comparisons. The benchmarking process. There is no standard or commonly accepted approach to the benchmarking process, and the major steps used in the benchmarking process are measuring the performance of the best in class relative to critical performance variables. Then second one is determining how the level of performance are achieved, and third one is using the information to develop and implement a plan for improvement. These are the three steps one has to follow. One should identify the function or process which will most beneficial should be taken up for benchmarking. It is wise to choose those functions that absorb the highest percent of cost and contribute the greatest role in differentiation, always thinking in terms of process improvements that will have a positive impact on the customer's purchasing decisions, quality and customer satisfaction, etc. Select key performance variables. Functions, activities and processes can be measured in terms of specific output measures of operations and performance. These are broadly classified as follows: cost and productivity, timeliness, differentiation and quality, business processes. This is the identify best in class. This is a major step in the benchmark analysis. The objective is identify companies whose operations are superior, the so-called best in class. Then compare your functions and processes with best in class companies' functions and process and set the target for your company as per your company capabilities. Measure your own performance. At this step in the process, after data collection of the best in class company and compare the performances and find out the gap in your company, note down the gaps in performance factors. After performing the gap analysis, you will find the size and frequency of the gap, causes of the gap, why it is exists, the different methods to close that gap, and reaching the performance level of the target benchmark process. So this is the how to measure your performance. Then actions to close the gap. So you have identified the problem, you have identified the causes for that problem and measured with the, compared with the best in class companies methods, and then now what you need to fill that gap, you have to take some actions. The actions to close the gap are: after finding the causes of gaps in the processes, alternative course of action must be adopted and practiced to close that gap. Selecting right alternative course of action is most important decision making for achieving the excellence. The action plan lists each action step, the time of completion, the person responsible and the cost if appropriate. The results expected from each action step should also be listed in order to provide a measure of whether the objective or output of each step is achieved or not. So this is the action plan. So conclusions. Learners, I hope you understood the concept of benchmarking, definition of benchmarking, types of benchmarking, advantages and disadvantages of benchmarking, critical success factors of benchmarking, and conducting process of benchmarking, etc. Thank you.